Aspiring champions have been overhauled. At double of their original price, they've gained more mass, more HP, and more damage. Nonetheless, they are still rarely a choice by players and barely saw battle. So in this video, we'll be looking into what these elite infantry are truly capable of, and talk about their possible uses in battle. To figure out what a unit can do, we must first understand their stats and abilities. The most obvious quality for aspiring champions is definitely their tankiness. With heavy armor and high melee defense of 45, they can actually grind through endless amounts of chaff. Combined with their impressive leadership, they can hold their own in constant combat even until later stages of battle, as long as they are not surrounded by elite armor-piercing infantry. Even against these tomb gods right here, after grinding through hundreds of skeleton chaff, they are still holding their own in battle. Even with the armor piercing on the halberds, the 45 outstanding melee defense of the aspiring champions allows them to survive and block most of the hits from the tomb gods. And if tomb gods are performing that poorly against aspiring champions, you can imagine how pathetic damage from the regular skeleton chaff would be against these elites of the elites. Another proof of their tankiness is their resistance to small arms fire, with 120 armor, silver shield which gives them 55% missile block chance, and also their small unit models. They basically are impervious to small arms fire, as most of the shots either miss, blocked, or simply can't go through their heavy armor. Just like the Starfire shafts, doing minimal damage as they approach the front line, even with their armor piercing, let alone regular missile fire like arrows from peasant bowmen, the fireballs from regular pink and blue horrors, as well as any other missile infantry units. Speaking of low model count, this is also something that gives the aspiring champions a nice durability advantage against splash damage, which includes but not limited to explosive artillery, breath attacks, and spells. You can see that the magical explosions on those blessed trebuchets are barely doing anything to the aspiring champions. Only direct hits, which are not exactly the most common occurrence, are able to do some noticeable damage. Splash damage relies on coming into contact with multiple models to maximize their damage, but unfortunately with only so few models in a single unit, combined with their heavy armor, the damage that aspiring champions would take from splash damage would be significantly reduced. Their second quality is their now improved offensive power, which is what the overhaul gave them. As you can see here, every single strike they do strikes multiple targets, as they do have that splash damage. And combined with their now increased weapon strength at 96, basically double from what they used to have, and also their high melee attack stats at 40, these splash attacks basically land on low to mid tier troops every time, thanks to their rather mediocre defenses. And on top of that, their attacks actually have knockbacks. Combined with their splash attack hurt box, they are great disruption tools, as they can knock multiple unit models off their feet every time, interrupt their attack animations, and limit their counter-attack potential, as units that get knocked over would be sent flying towards the back for quite a bit of distance, and then they need to spend some time lying on the ground and get back up and walk all the way back into the engagement once again. That's a lot of time wasted not doing damage, while the aspiring champions would be holding firm, beating down whatever that stands before them. So basically, the aspiring champions are a great alternative frontline unit for the Warriors of Chaos. They have lost their Vanguard ability in the overhaul and now acts more like a standard infantry unit, and don't be deceived by their low unit model count. Unlike monstrous infantry units like say ogres, which often needs other infantry support, these guys do not need any meat shields. With their armor and melee defense, unless their opponents are specifically anti-armor and anti-infantry, the aspiring champions would have enough stats to shrug off those incoming damage from melee attacks. Just like here with the Eternal Gods and Wildwood Rangers, despite being armor-piercing units, they struggle to do damage to the aspiring champions once their charge bonus wears off. And even with the Starfire Shaft Fire support, the aspiring champions are still able to hold thanks to their silver shields. And in turn, their high weapon damage and high attack stats, when combined with that splash damage, allows them to counterpunch effectively, cutting down all these lightly armored Wood Elf infantry. Overall, aspiring champions are best tasked to fight through endless amounts of low tier to mid tier infantry who are not capable of doing massive burst damage in a short time, and as long as these units are lightly armored, aspiring champions will pack a decent punch against them, especially when they rely on physical resistance, which the champions can easily overcome with their own magic attacks, making them a nice choice against multiple demon factions and also the wood elves. And even if they don't get into a favorable engagement and are forced to fight some non-offensive infantry or some monsters, they can still hold their own in battle perfectly fine for a prolonged period of time thanks to their impressive defense stats. And if you really want to kill whatever is surrounding them, you can safely dump any kind of area of effect spells onto them, as their low model count means that they will take minimal friendly fire damage from the spells. Of course, being tanky doesn't mean being invulnerable, as the aspiring champions are weak to units that can focus a high amount of armor-piercing damage. For example, precision artillery like cannons and eagle clawbolt throwers, which the projectiles cannot be blocked by any shields, armor-piercing monsters like dragons and griffins, armor-piercing troops that surrounds them, especially if they have anti-infantry bonuses. Just like here, the Great Swords are performing relatively well against the aspiring champions, especially with their heavy armor mitigating the non-armor piercing damage from the aspiring champions, requiring Archaon to drop down a Searing Doom to equal the playing fields. Not only that, large single entity monsters, especially lords and heroes, can also overpower the melee defenses on the champions, doing some good damage with their massive weapon strength. Personally, I find the aspiring champions quite a fun unit to use, and I've had a tendency to troll my opponents with these guys since game 1. With the changes to their abilities and stats, their role on the battlefield has also been changed. Now, they are an outstanding unit with equally powerful offense and defense, not only capable of holding the line against endless hordes of enemies, but also they now have the power to cut them down. At the same time, bringing the champions instead of regular marauder or warrior infantry can neutralize a lot of anti-infantry tools that the opponents might bring. Trebuchets, mortars, breath attacks, vortex spells, none of them would do much against the aspiring champions, while the champions themselves would be happily tanking away at the small arms fire from their opponents and then cutting down whatever chaff units that are designed to slow and drag down a chaos infantry rush. They might not be as fast and aggressive like the Forsaken, but they excel at a slow and steady push, maximizing their damage against low armored infantry chaff, while they themselves would be taking minimal damage in return. With their impressive holding power thanks to their leadership and defensive stats, they make amazing anvils for your chaos mobility to hammer home on.